And the number one use case for data management agents was data quality. So, come full circle. You got the fox in charge of the henhouse.
Welcome back to It's About Data. Episode 83 is a continuation of our conversation with Kevin Petrie and Merv Adrian on harnessing unstructured data for AI innovation. Okay, we're back with another episode with Kevin Petrie and Merv Adrian from BARC. And the last episode we recorded together, we identified some of the problems that they found in their survey with governance and data quality in the world of unstructured data that we're more and more focused on now with AI, with agents, with everything else.
And I think what's really interesting here is, so as we were ending up, is that in some ways it's like we were kind of revisiting some very familiar problems. But again, this is on a very different canvas, which is with unstructured data. And so I think we'd like to start off, as I said, this episode, we want to give our audience hope, like, here's what you could do. First off, how do we look at data quality? How do we define data quality with unstructured data? And and what are some of the key, what are some of the key approaches here, especially when it comes to, say, data prep?
Merv, you want to take that?
I feel like you've done more work here. So
Okay.
I'm glad somebody's done the work there.
Oh, no, I just sit
Dad,
around.
why don't you take it? No, I'm just kidding.
I take advantage of ideas.
So we asked two key questions related to this. One is, what activities are you performing on your unstructured data? And we found that about 2/3 of organizations, most organizations, or a little over half to 2/3, are classifying it and evaluating it. And that's what they should be doing initially. It's the right place to start. Another middle group is cataloging. But if you go much further down in performing sort of mid-tier activities, and then you go further down, far fewer are actually vectorizing it, which I think is fascinating. It might indicate that vectorization is less critical. These LLMs are getting pretty darn smart to navigate text on their own. It might also be that vectorization is a hidden aspect of broader multimodal databases. I think it's a factor of both those two.
Can I ask one question there?
Please.
Just what you were saying, that I'm wondering if then maybe vectorization is just kind of like a transitional stage, that as the language model gets smart enough, might we end up bypassing it?
Well, you might remember what I said about it the first time we talked about it, Tony. I said, vectorization is not a market, it's a feature.
Totally.
And that's what Kevin is suggesting, is that the core strategic data management software that most organizations are using is adding vectorization as a capability because it's necessary, right?
Okay.
So if you're going to classify, and by the way, this is an interesting difference between North America and Europe, which we sort of alluded to earlier. The North American respondents are also very interested in the classification and validation, but they are much more focused on indexing the data and migrating it to the places where it can be used most efficiently. We've gone a little farther down the path already, and we can't say this directly from the data. This is a bit more of a conclusion opinion, but I personally believe it has to do with the fact that they've done more and they have identified the roadblocks, and they recognize that you can't get this to work if you don't have an index. It's still just a blob of unstructured data.
Right.
Once you build semantics and start creating indexes, you can treat it as if it were in fact structured, because you've built the structure.
Look it up. Yeah.
Well, that's why I was wondering if that vectors might be just a transitional stage before we get, before we start basically perfecting, like, how we index, how we have language models that can recognize meaning in these terms.
Yeah, and I think that it could be a transitional stage for certain use cases and certain data types or the sources, but it could also be, what I'm seeing is that vector finding chunks of data is triangulated if you also have just basic keyword matching.
Right.
And it's also triangulated further if you have a knowledge graph in there, understanding ontologies. So it's one of several arrows in the quiver, and you might not always need it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because the hybrid approach of just putting your vectors and your embeddings in Postgres, for example, as structured data, and then doing a search by other structured fields to find the chunk of text you're looking for, that has grown increasingly popular, honestly, and it's available as an off-the-shelf feature in a lot of places. But to make that work, you have to get the right structured data matched with the right chunks of text, or this method does not work at all.
Yeah.
Mm,
What we're also finding is that a lot of companies are not moving the data. And
Yeah,
so that's been a theme. Data has gravity,
yeah.
migration is complex, sovereignty
hmm
concerns are rising. A lot of that data is far flung, multiple data centers on-prem, multiple clouds, everything in between.
hmm
And it underscores the need for a cross-platform independent semantic layer that provides federated.
Mm,
We looked at location a bit, and the warehouses are in the cloud, and the unstructured data is on premises is a reasonable generalization. It's not always true,
interesting. Yeah.
hmm
and
Yeah,
it happens a lot. And it doesn't surprise me that a company like Weaviate, for example,
yeah,
had a fantastic year last year, going in and selling people the very thing that we were just talking about, vectorization.
Yep.
hmm
This stuff, let us turn loose our tool and give you some of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and again, the challenge there, as I said before, about markets versus features is, all the big guys are moving as fast as they can to catch up and make it unnecessary to bring another vendor in. And from our very first survey, one of the most obvious things that we heard from everybody is if we can use our trusted existing vendor partnerships to get this done,
Mm,
the
yeah.
way
hmm
we'd rather do it. We don't need a bunch of new vendors and a bunch of new relationships to manage.
yeah.
Sometimes it's the only way to go because nobody else is
hmm
doing it.
hmm
But I think the pace of software development is accelerating quite dramatically. And I think part of that is very attributable to the very tools we're talking about.
Right.
Some of these AI tools are making the software engineering process a great deal faster and more
Yeah.
efficient, and people are getting features built in much quicker than they used to.
Yeah. I want to ask a question about this, and I asked a very similar question to Nikita Shamganov of Databricks, who founded Neon, talking about Postgres in this case, but it's a more general question. And
Yeah.
that is, if we can generate code so quickly, that means we can also generate data changes very quickly. And as any data engineer knows, every commit can bring new data quality problems. So how do we manage the data quality problems that arise with a much faster pace of software development that engineers maybe have a little less visibility into than they used to?
The return of impact analysis, huh? Yeah.
Mm.
So what I found fascinating from the survey that Sean and I published last year was we asked companies to stack rank their or just say which were the top um, use cases for agentic data management. And the number one use case for data management agents was data quality. So
Mm,
come full circle. You got the fox in charge of the henhouse. But it makes sense because AI, whether it's ML, anomaly detection, or things like that, or Gen AI, can help identify data quality issues, and it can help do it at scale. You still want a human in the loop
right.
reviewing what they find, but that can be a way to start to keep up, Matt, with what you're saying about the data quality issues that can
Mm,
quickly propagate and create a lot of downstream issues. One thing that Merv and I found in this survey was that lineage views are lacking, and so a lot of organizations
hmm,
have a lot of work to do when it comes to tracing the lineage of how their unstructured data is um,
hmm
getting visualized and traced. So they need to catch up from a data quality perspective in that sense.
Tony, you probably remember a couple of years ago when we talked about schema creep a lot.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
These things change. Those things are quite visible. You can see a schema.
Yeah.
What about model creep?
Oh,
These
gosh.
models are updating themselves in the
hmm
background. They're not sending us, at least today. We've changed the validation rule over here based on the last 6 months worth of data. We're not getting those updates.
Right.
As things change in these non-transparent, non-audited models, those changes are going to take place without our knowing that they're happening. And
Yeah.
the governance that Kevin and I are talking about today is like baby steps.
Oh, gosh. Yes.
It's just getting it right at the outset here. What are we going to do about changes?
Yeah.
Dependent changes. that
Mer-
generate multiple outcomes, in other places. So yeah, it's going to get pretty interesting. Right?
Yeah,
Yes.
Merv, you're killing me softly with your song there, because the thing is, one of my pet peeves has been, that both data and AI models are moving targets, and how are we, and the fact is that, let's just take data quality,
Mm-hmm.
data and data validation. For a certain model, asks, basically evaluating specific criteria, the data may fit. um, as that model, basically evolves, it may not. But yet, how have we correlated to? And the thing is that, and this is one thing I've gotten, to all the IBMs of the world, and I'm not just singling out IBM, but folks like them, is that when you're basically going to start correlating basically data governance with AI governance, that's a much larger issue here. It's a huge Pandora's box. We can be talking for the next year on that. I want to return to one very basic thing, which, just as you say, basically we need to at least start the baby steps here, before trying to boil the ocean, which is, we have an idea in terms of how to define quality for structured data. I'm not saying we have the problem licked, but at least we have a handle on what the criteria is, at least for structured. But how do we define quality for unstructured data, as opposed to, let's say, because, for instance, like, you might have data that's, let's say, just to argument's sake, factually accurate, but might be the wrong data. And so therefore, but is that data quality? I mean, what do you define as data quality, I guess? And how do we basically manage it in unstructured?
Good question. Okay, so I think there are a few things. One is semantic accuracy, understanding what the sentiment is, um, and that as was one method, one measure of semantic accuracy. It's you want to have documents that are labeled, that have the right governance, technical, business, and operational metadata attached to it. You also want to have a human validator that says, yes, this reflects the latest contracts or set of contracts that you can use for insurance claims processing. Um, and so it's going to come down to judgment calls and probabilistic assessments more than simple binary, that cell is correct or incorrect.
Hmm.
And it's going to depend on the use case, the data set, and so forth.
A very clear-eyed and explicit documentation of how this relates to policy, our policy, regulatory policy. Those things are often considered separate, but they are inextricably linked to quality in this case, because they're going to be used for decision making. So if our data wasn't collected, even according to the right policy, in a regulated environment, the data quality in the old sense might be fine, but we didn't, to your point, Tony, we didn't collect the right data.
Right.
We left some
Yeah.
things out. There are things that we need to know that we don't, or we didn't do a good enough job documenting the process. We don't know how the questions were asked. Anybody who watches TV and hears political opinions realizes how easy it is to manipulate the
Right.
questions.
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
you got to ask the questions in an appropriate way, and
Yeah.
then there's a whole set of data that is in systems that have never been connected, and this is the whole point of the
Right,
context discussion.
right, right. I mean, I just want to
Meaning,
touch on one thing just before passing over to Matt, which is this touches on a lot of conversations we've had with folks like Yitzhak Tesselman at Microsoft, Jessica Talisman, about ontology. I mean, we're bordering on that. Of course, that's a whole the Pandora's box, but it's all related. Matt, take
Yeah.
it away.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny as you talk about this, Merv, the problems with this existing data being there, but we just weren't even thinking about quality back when we collected it. This is something we've seen before in the era of big data. I think we backed off from that some in the structured world, but just collect everything and worry about it later. Well, it turned out that if you didn't know how it was collected, structured or unstructured, it wasn't nearly so useful. So, what are your thoughts on steps that organizations need to take to clean up the mess? Do they need to recollect data? Do they need to have a survey? Do they need to define data owners who will add, I don't know, quality metrics? Like, where should they start?
I think Kevin and I agree on this one. I think pretty violently classification and validation come first,
Got it.
and I think the outcome of that process is not a check mark.
Yeah.
This is not certified. It is probably, we have to go back into these very specific areas and collect data again.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to define that process. There is going to be a new data collection wave that comes out of understanding the problems that we have with the data that we have. And Matt, when you were talking about the early data warehouse days, there was a story I used to love to tell, which was that when the bad guys in the old film noir movies wanted to knock somebody off, they always took somebody down to the warehouse district because there were dark corners that nobody had gone to for years, right? And that's what people are finding out about their data right now. They're looking into some dark corners and going, wait, this isn't right. Or where is it? Or who the hell asked that question and why? There's going to be a great deal of remediation in actual data collection that's going to come out of this effort.
I was afraid you were going to say the justifiable homicide is going to happen at the data warehouse.
Good. And I think a lot of it's going to be justifiably human led.
Right. Yeah.
Humans filtering, humans classifying, humans governing,
right.
defining what is usable and not. And that's not a bad thing. And we did find that in our survey. We found that a lot of the governance related stuff is going to be human.
And actually, this is great because this brings us around to the question I was going to ask first. But actually, Merv, you want to say something first before I go ahead?
No, I was just going to sing a song. There's a place for us. Get the machine overlords meme. I think it's about, hey, we're going to be necessary for a little while around here. That's good.
There we go.
By the way, none of us have ever met before. But anyway, this is actually going full circle to the question I was originally going to ask, which is one of the findings you had was that basically with unstructured data, it involved a wide cross-section of the organization. And so therefore, it's involving folks that never really have traditionally been involved with, let's say, data management, data quality, data validation, data stewardship. So what would you say in terms of how we adapt, how we bring wider audiences into this? Because I think that really brings us full circle.
Sure.
Yeah.
Kevin, you want to take a crack at that one first?
Yeah. So we did find, we asked all types of, across these various business units, finance, customer service, R&D, operations, marketing, and so forth, who's in production with AI on your unstructured data. And a surprising chunk were in production in any given business function. And you would expect it to be in IT or maybe a couple other pockets, a center of excellence, places where they're going to be more forward-looking. But it was quite broad, and I think one is it reflects the fact that that Anthropic and so forth are pretty broad use. They're very useful to a lot of knowledge workers, but also it shows that each of those departments is starting to think seriously about what aspects of their unstructured data can be fed into these tools.
There's some real cognitive dissonance in our results, Tony. When we asked, and this is the question you're referring to, the folks who were saying we're already applying AI to our unstructured data, were IT centers of excellence people, the operations leads. Those guys got it right. We can't get the work done if we don't get this right. Unhappily, at least from my perspective, people like legal and HR, for whom we tend to use AI as the great examples when we put them up on stage to do case studies, those folks are behind here. They're just getting to it. And I think that was necessary because they have to have the faith that the people who are going to execute it have started to think through those problems. And now we can turn to HR or we can turn to the support of the executive team with these tools. We need to make sure they were right first. And once again, it's like, hey, there's a place for us. Us IT guys still have a few shots left in our quiver, to add value. So that's good news.
And I think part of what's happening as well is that a given department is going to a subset of unstructured data. There's a long tail of stuff they still haven't even discovered, but they're using it in a few places where they see work. But it was interesting to see that some of the top use cases, like Merv said, the showcase customer use cases, customer experience management, HR and talent management, document analysis. Those are some of the top things where unstructured data is playing in there.
Interesting. Well, and I think there's going to be a whole process of IT teaching these organizations and collaborating with them to get the data labeled and to classify it and everything else that needs to be done. Yeah.
Well, it probably won't surprise you that there is a place where these things overlap. IT has to spend a lot of its time on procurement these days.
Yeah.
Where am I going to get chips or tokens or whatever it is I need to get the job done? It turns out that in the IT industry, procurement and supply chain popped up really close to the top. Those guys have had to deal with this problem, and so they've gone after it. And if you've seen the stories about entire towns being shut down because a data center is going to be built and it's going to use all the electricity, you understand how meaningful to society some of these questions are going to be.
Yeah. Well, there are huge questions here that we will have to discuss on another episode, but thank you both so much for taking the time to join us. And we will look forward to reprising this conversation in the future, maybe after another study comes out, maybe after some relevant announcements, or maybe after seeing how the next year goes.
Right if you get work.
There you go.
Sounds like you'll be busy for a while.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, we got all good research generates great new questions, and we've got a list of them. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Okay, we'll be talking. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.